You're back for another camp at CKB. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got associated with the gym and how many times you've come over and helped out?
How many times I've been how I became associated with gym? I believe it all happened in Thailand. So this is all kind of rooted back to Thailand. I believe it was April of 2019 was the first time that I came over for the Gastelum fight. And since then, I came over for a couple more, and then we had a bit of a shake-up in the world for a bit of COVID, and then we finished it stateside. So then I was only able to link up really during fight week when it was in the States, when it was in Arizona, Houston, and then the last two, Vegas, New York, I came back. So yeah, this is just at right around 4 years now. We're coming up on 4 years that I've been with the team. Took a lot of years off my life, but I don't think I'd have it any other way. It's been good. It's been very good.
And now that we have that, Hughes, why did you first bring in?
Because I don't think I'd met Frank at that stage. I just heard a lot about him, about George's brother and his wrestling credentials, and just his skill and stuff and his knowledge. I just heard about it, and then I knew George probably wouldn't be the right person to bring over, and being that he was the head coach at Tiger Muay Thai at the time, and I always want to bring people. I've always had a penchant for bringing people into the team that we know, or that someone can vouch for them and highly recommend them, so that we're not bringing in, in this industry you can bring in all sorts of interesting characters. So I talked to George about Frank, and then we organised him to come over, and it was, and then we just he hit it off with me and the rest of the coaches and the team, and then we got some insight into what he can bring, what he brings to the table, and his kind of intricate knowledge of that folk style wrestling, that American wrestling. And he's just a integral part of the team now.
And Frank, who have you worked with at CKB?
At CKB, I've worked with everybody, all the way from Israel Volk, Dan, Brad, Kai, Bloods, Carlos, all the way down to the Alta group. I mean, I've helped everybody.
John, all of our professionals coming up, John, Kevin, Cameron, Rogan, you name it. He basically, when he comes over primarily for the UFC guys, but Frank's part of the team. He works out with everybody, gives everybody tips and helps coach everybody. Frank's worked with everybody. If Frank's not with at CKB, he's at Freestyle. If he's not at Freestyle or CKB, then he's always at Bangtao. If he's not at Bangtao, who are some of the other guys you've worked with? You worked with the PFL champion,
Brendan Lofkin, the PFL champion.
You were just with Fiziev.
Wei Lee.
You've done work with the big
Tyson,
the big heavyweight.
Tafa.
Who fought Tyson back in the day, and I think Tyson beat him. Muay Thai.
Khalil
Roundtree.
Yeah, several fighters that have come through. Peter Yan, some good ones. And then of course people that just fight one championship and stuff like that. Ali, even some of our new pros like Jada. We have some girls and stuff like that come to the gym that are our locals. JJ, the gaffer. Some people who are just starting out their professional career or still in amateurs that are at the gym at Bangtao train with. So
it's an impressive list of names that Frank, high level names that Frank's worked with. Frank's worked with a lot more fighters than I have at that level, because I of course just work my team, and Frank basically is all over the place with whoever requires his help. So.
And as a gym owner in Thailand, where it's a predominantly very strong stand-up style, how have you used your wrestling credentials to help the up-and-coming Thai MMA?
I think that's been a contribution of quite a few people. One being definitely my brother, George, because he has such a big passion for the Thai culture as far as the MMA scene goes, and just being around it. Obviously, Muay Thai is predominantly their main sport, but there are many athletes that do the Muay Thai that want to cross over, because They see a better route as far as income, as far as maybe a better life than what the Muay Thai can provide. So they want to venture out and try that obstacle and take that route. So that's where I've had the chance to work with the Top Noise, to work with the Lomas, to work with, you know, the Pioks and the guys like that who have kind of started Raw. And again, I came in on a couple years into like helping Top Noise, but I was there. I remember being there at day one when Loma had first come to the gym and watching her progress and stuff. So yeah, from a country that has a predominantly very good stand-up style, and an all-around different aspect of the sport, you know, it's just another avenue of MMA. It's just another way that they can blend it and get involved into the sport and try a different path to where they can make more money, because at the end of the day, that's what people do chase. Everybody has a reason. And some people are in it for the money, and they want to be able to benefit and help their families or significant others help better themselves in their career, and that's the way they can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Frank, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but his specialist expertise has become teaching and coaching people who are predominantly high-level stand-up strikers or have a stand-up background, and integrating his folk-style wrestling into their game. If you think about the people that he works with and how he got into the sport, that is just the way that his style of coaching and his style of wrestling has been shaped towards people that are predominantly strikers. So it's a very specialist field that he's kind of fallen into, and one that sits really highly in the sport. You can see that the credentialed strikers that he works with, they are working for a specific type of integration in terms of that wrestling coming in. And that's something that Frank and his brother George, Frank and Andre, who's the wrestling coach at CKB, Frank and myself and the other coaches, I mean, that's something that's years and years in the making, like how to integrate that wrestling in the right manner, in the right way to these athletes who don't come from a collegiate background in wrestling or haven't wrestled in the juniors. That's kind of where I would say Frank has specialized.
How have you actually seen, let's say, your highest profile athletes would be like Israel and Walt? How have you seen their wrestling improve over the years you've been working with them?
Significantly. I mean, an example is, you know, obviously Andre's done a phenomenal job with Israel up until this point, so I kind of came in as a helping hand with it, or just a different aspect. But, you know, when it first started out, it was all Israel was fighting all wrestlers, so it was a lot of defense. But now you can see him in a championship fight. He can get takedowns. He can secure takedowns. You know, he has the capability to do that sort of thing, and that comes from a lot of practice in camp and out of camp, working at it. Somebody like, you know, Volk, who comes from a footy background but can mix things up. I mean, yeah, he won a New South Wales championship, but I mean, I don't know if we necessarily can count that, but we will.
I won that championship.
Yeah.
Let's be honest.
Yeah, so, but with him, it's, you know, both of those guys, it was just a rigorous work ethic. And then, you know, now you have a guy like Volk who can defend and get away from a guy like Islam who can also take Islam down. So I think that says a lot about, you know, the way he can, I guess you would say his ceiling as far as what he can add to his arsenal in the wrestling department.
But the work, the real work that Frank and particularly Andre have done is we have taken this philosophy that we have where we know that we cannot become the best wrestlers in the world. We cannot all of a sudden start a wrestling career at the age of 25 into the late 20s, 30 and expect to be expert NCAA quality Division 1 wrestlers. We know that. But what we do know is we need to find a way to bridge that gap. And what Frank and Andre have done is they've taken the specialist areas of wrestling, they've compartmentalized them into smaller areas, and they've figured out what exactly we can take from wrestling, put as much time into, in terms of what time we have left, and we can give it to the boys and they can become experts. So they can't become experts at the whole field, but what Andre and Frank have done over the years, if they've taken particular fields, particular parts of wrestling, and said, if we put all our effort into this, we can get up to NCAA, quality in terms of level. We just can't do the whole thing because we just don't have that time. So it's about their philosophical approach to the wrestling and how they've picked apart what exactly each athlete needs and what exactly they can actually do, they can actually achieve within the given amount of time. Time being either the time in between fights, the fight camp, or just how long they have in their career. And, an example of what I'm talking about is, the boys can't be as good as an NCAA Division 1 wrestler at shooting and dropping in for single legs and changing level. But in wrestling, you don't have a cage. So that's an area we can take the boys to, and we can train really heavily on the strategy and the tactics there, and we can become just as good as any other high-level wrestler in that area because we have trained that area for just as long as they have. And there's all little different nuances and stuff that we can kind of take different areas from wrestling, and we can level ourselves up. And that's what these boys have done, and that's what intrigues me and amazes me about the kind of the work behind the scenes that they do in terms of picking out those gems and saying, this is where we can improve, this is where we can make advancements on the competition. Yeah, it's a kind of a long-winded answer, but...
What do you think is the most important discipline for MMA? Do you think it's wrestling? Or striking? What do you think is a good base to start off with?
This is, to be fair, I think me and Frank are going to disagree here, but you work, it's very murky waters when you're saying one discipline is more important than the other. Okay? The predominant view is that wrestling is the most important one because wrestling dictates where the fight goes. And yes, but what Frank and Andre have done is come up with a whole system of avoiding wrestling. There's a whole myriad, a whole system you have to get through before you even begin to engage in wrestling. And it gets very complicated, and obviously we can't let out exactly what that system is, but and if I give you some general things, there's a whole lot of turning an opponent, making an opponent have certain reactions, putting an opponent in certain positions in the cage, turning an opponent. There's a whole lot of feinting. There's specific shots that they've worked out that really discourage people closing the distance and shooting. And then when you start wrestling, even when you get into like the inside range and stuff, there's still a lot of things that you can do before you have to tie up with the guy. There's a whole lot of they've got a whole complicated system in terms of their framing and what they do before they go in, before the guy can even shoot an underhook. There's a whole series of obstacles and barriers that the guy has to get through before we even start wrestling. So I think more the way I kind of like jokingly think about it is wrestling will win you fights, but striking will turn you into a superstar. And that's like kind of the way it kind of works in my head.
I mean, it's hard to disagree with what Eugene's saying. Definitely don't think it's jiu-jitsu, but Yeah, again, what Eugene said is pretty spot on. You know, wrestling can dictate where it goes, but you know what happens when you can't take somebody down? Then you're stuck on your feet, and then you have to get through layers just to get to the person, and then once you get to them, you also have to get to the next part, which is finishing the takedown or finishing whatever it is, which can be extremely difficult. And there's a lot of variables that go into it at the same time. And you know, like he had said, nowadays with the way the sport is and the way pay-per-views sell, is they don't pay to watch people wrestle, they pay to watch people stand up and get knocked out. You know, as a consumer in the sport, people are pretty bizarre. They're mental. They pay good money to watch.
I think, yeah, it's just too much of a generalization to say what's more important than the other. I think nowadays, especially where the sport has evolved to now, they're all equally as important.
Of
they're
course.
all just as important than each other. You can't have one without the other. Like you just, very few fighters now get themselves to the top off of just being specialists at one thing.
Agreed.
Who was the last person we saw do that? He's retired from the sport now.
Yes.
He and bless him, he taught the world a lot about wrestling and avoiding damage, going through your whole career, avoiding damage and getting out. And he showed that you can still be a specialist, but how many people now, how many champions that raise to the top are specialists like that? You'll find very, very few.
Very few.
Most of them are good all round. So there's a good diplomatic answer.
So you're a very interesting character in that you're an expert in your field, but you're also in the trenches every day.
Yeah.
What do you think you bring to the team as a coach and a training partner?
I mean, I think as a coach, obviously I stay in my lane, so I bring obviously the wrestling side of it, but and this will fall into the teammate training part as well. I would probably say everybody knows my energy and kind of my like philosophy on life and how I go about my daily activities. You know, I'm always somebody who's I guess you would say not even easygoing is the word I'm looking for, but I'm always somebody who's pretty amped up for the most part. Like no matter what it is, I try to find the positivity in everything that we're gonna do, whether it's a hard session or whether it's not, or whether it's a long travel, or whether it's in the back and there's nerves and the fight's getting ready to happen. You just have to keep the same type of energy throughout the whole process. You have to, and that comes from the coaching side of things, that comes into the training side of things as a partner. I'm the type that's, you're gonna get all of me. You're gonna get 100% of what I'm gonna bring you, right? I'm not gonna give you something that's half-assed. And yeah, I think just kind of my chemistry with things. Usually when I meet people within the first 5 minutes, they either love me or hate me. It could even be sooner than that, you know, for the most part. Like, the Islanders seem to love me. You know, the Kiwis not so much, but that's irrelevant to me. You know, I just, again, I feed off of other people. So, yeah, a lot of that stuff, and then that comes from, I've been that way since I was young, since I first started wrestling. Since I got into other sports, since I got to college, since I got into the car business, before I left the car business, since I got to Thailand, I've stayed the same. I haven't changed, you know. I don't necessarily need people's approval for anything. Sometimes I don't really read people's approval. I just kind of go about it how I feel like they would want to see, how I would want to be viewed or whatever, you know. I go off the cusp of things. And so far it's worked for me, you know what I mean? Like, again, people may have they may have a disagreement, but I know what I'm here for. I know who my main focus is and what the job is at hand. And to me, those are the people that I care about what they think the most, or the ones who I help on a daily basis, you know.
I think Frank, again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Frank brings such a specialist look. I think jumping in with the boys is an important part of his coaching. First of all, the boys get to see that high level of wrestling, whether it be defensively or offensively. But also, I mean, I haven't trained with the boys for a couple of years now, but you do get a different perspective when you're in with them. You know, when you're sparring them, when they grip up with you, when they put an underhook in, body lock, you feel it, and you obviously experienced coaches can see that and make adjustments, but there's also some advantages to just being in there and feeling it. And Frank, you know, many a times I've seen Frank, you know, in a scrimmage or in a position, and then the round will finish, and Frank will know straight away, no, Izzy, you need to do this. You need to put your head here, put your hand here, get your foot over here. I mean, that's all from, you know, Frank being in amongst it with the boys, and that specialist look. I know that's you know, I bring Frank over for his knowledge, you know, in terms of what he can see and where he can guide the boys. But I bring him over also, a big part of it is for, you know, so the boys can feel him and he can feel the boys and he can adjust them like that.
How do you use them? Frank, can you maybe help? How do you work with the coaches like Joe, Hughes, George? What do you bring in to like help with the game plan? How does that work?
By that point, it's kind of the coaches, Eugene or Joe, Uncle Joe.
It's just feedback, really. Like,
Feedback.
Yeah,
They point me in the direction of where they think that we need to be, or, you know, I listen to them, because you always want to listen to somebody who's been in this game longer than you have and has more experience under the belt. So when it comes to that, I'm usually all ears.
we just all bounce ideas off each other.
Yeah.
And obviously we all have our specialist fields. Like a lot of the CKB coaches are predominantly striking guys, but they have different specialist areas in striking. Andre and Frank are wrestlers, but they have their own specialist areas in the wrestling. And then I guess it's just feedback. Frank, what do you think of this? I mean, Frank knows how many hundreds of messages I've sent him. Frank, I need to know about this. Frank, what do you think of this? Frank, Islam's this, you know, Ortega's this. But, you know, just their feedback, their perspective. And then we shape an idea, put an idea together, and then that idea just snowballs, and then that idea eventually turns sometimes into a strategy, and sometimes or a tactic. And then, okay, let's go with it. Let's field test it. Let's put it into sparring. Let's get people's opinions. Let's see how Volk feels, Israel feels. It's kind of like the general kind of like
That's how we
idea
go
of how
about
we
it.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is for both you two. I'm curious on this. Do you think like what you teach should be safeguarded and protected, or are you okay with it being out there because people don't know the specifics of it, like for striking and wrestling, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
Because you see online people have been trying to do the feints for a long time and they just not necessarily nailed it, but
yeah, I think if a fighter is very successful, and particularly if they're very successful in a dominant fashion, you are obligated to have a look at what that fighter's doing, and then looking into that very deeply, analysing it, and seeing if you can replicate it, or if you can't replicate it, what parts of it you can replicate, take and apply to your fighters. Being that each one of your fighters that you have don't have the capability to replicate what another fighter's doing. Some of them do, some of them don't. Some of them can take some stuff, some of them can take other stuff. I think you're obligated to do that, but I'm okay with information being out there, because I know that having the information is one thing, but actually applying it and learning to do it well, to become an expert, to become a master in it, that's a whole nother ballgame. You can have a whole lot of information, you can put a pile of books in front of someone, but if they don't read those books 100 times, then none of that information is ever going to be useful to them. So, and that's kind of the approach of another Kiwi, famous Kiwi coach, John Danaher. He puts everything out there, and he doesn't believe he's putting his team at any disadvantage, because you put the information out there, but how many people are putting the time, the reps, the energy, analysing it, and putting the work in to replicate it. That's another level, and that's where most people fall short and don't reach. So the information by itself is pretty hopeless. It's what you do with the information. So what do you think, Frank?
No, I think nowadays you can find anything on the internet. It's accessible. Everybody, for the most part, will do, like you take an example like BJJ Fanatics. They do wrestling, they do stand-up, they do like MMA, and they have, probably 50 different wrestlers that do it, that all show something different or something similar. Most of it does overlap. Same thing with some stand-up and stuff, same thing with other things. So the information's out there, but like he said, it's just a matter of
It's what you do with it.
It's what you do with it. You apply it, or how you do.
How you apply it, how you analyze it, how we get it, take it,
break it down, simplify it,
and give it to the boys. How you teach it.
How you regurgitate the information.
100%. That's all. Everything's about that. And I mean, Frank and Andre and myself, I'm not afraid to say, we are plagiarizing a lot of people's different information, but we are putting their bits of information through a very stringent process before we start to actually use it and believe that it can be successful. Nothing's new in this sport.
I'm pretty curious. Kickboxing gym. How often do they wrestle in and out of camp, do you think?
Man, the way they go about things, you could find yourself wrestling, I would say anywhere from, with the evening and then the morning classes, 6 to 7 times. Tuesday nights, Wednesday nights, Friday mornings, you chuck in the 9 a.m. class. In some aspect, whether it's hard learning or just learning technique in general and going through positional stuff or reviews, you'll find yourself wrestling quite a bit. You chuck in Saturday sparring, a couple rounds of grappling in that, you get even more. So, again, I know people joke about it. It could be called city wrestling instead of city kickboxing, because that is true. And that's a testament to the gym as far as what they need to know, that they need to cover all angles, and one of it is being the wrestling side of things.
We do a lot of wrestling. We probably do more wrestling than, I would say we do. I know for a fact from the camps that I know, we do a lot more wrestling than a lot of camps. But we also understand where we've come from and the background we're coming from, and that we don't come from a heavy wrestling culture, and we don't come from a heavy wrestling martial arts background. So we also know that there's deficit to be make up. So we probably make up for the deficit by doing a lot more wrestling than most camps would do, I would say. But yeah, like Frank said, we're wrestling in some form or another just about every day, I would say. And like I said, for the reasons that I said, just making up for a deficit. And I also alluded to earlier, it's a specific type of wrestling. It's not, we're not hitting the wrestling room or the wrestling mat like we're a wrestling collegiate wrestling team. We're narrowing down the amount of information we have to master, and it's a very specific type of wrestling regimen that we're following. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's kind of a question that a lot of people would want to know, really, how much wrestling we do. Yeah. And it's not really a big secret that I have to keep secret. We have to keep secret. We do a lot of wrestling.
Does it ever feel like a job to you, Frank? You travel the world, spread the knowledge. You've made a career out of something you've obviously been passionate about your whole life. Does it ever feel like a job to you, or you just?
Nah. To me, this isn't work. To me, this is enjoyment. This is what I get to do. I'm blessed to be able to kind of spread the book of wrestling, I guess you could say. And it's good for me because it keeps me close to the sport of wrestling, but just through a different avenue. Just through, now the UFC is such a big sport, Bellator, all the other organizations, it's so big, and wrestling's a part of all of it, so it can keep me close to it, and being able to help people in the Alta class, or help people like Israel or anybody else or Alex or anybody. Nah, it doesn't feel like work, and it's not. You know, it's my hobby. It's what I love to do. I've just found a niche for it, and I like the fact, and I enjoy the fact that I'm on the different side of the world where it is less accessible. Right? It's not in the States to where they have 80-something Division I programs and Division II, Division III, and this and that. And it's in a place to where Australia, New Zealand, or Thailand, it isn't known predominantly for the wrestling. So yeah, you know, you gotta find your value for something, and mine is wrestling. So I definitely don't take that for granted by any means. You know, it's taken me all over the world, created relationships.
How long has it been since you last worked Cobb? What was the last day in the car yard? What was it, Cobb?
2017 was the last day I had a real job. You know, when I walked out of the car business. So it's true. Ever since then, this is, man. You cannot not have fun showing up and running a practice or helping somebody improve to get to the next level. Like that's, you know, as a coach, that's what you want. And not only that, but you also get to mix it up with some of the best athletes in the world and pick their brains. You know, you can spar with some of the best guys. You know, and learn some tricks from them.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you guys. I think it's good.